Welcome back, listeners. Welcome to another episode of the Lead Well podcast. This is Brandon Holland, your host, BW Holland 32 on social media, and really cool episode planned for you today. We have with us a former business owner, a former leader, a current husband, a phenomenal musician, and more importantly, a really good friend. My good friend, Tom Pappas. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Brandon. It's always a pleasure to be with you, live or over this internet thing.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So let's just kind of jump right in and get our listeners a little bit more familiar with you. Just give us a brief introduction of some of your professional background and how you got to where you are today.
Well, the nice thing about it is I retired 4 years ago from a leadership position. So that position is long since in the rearview mirror, which is kind of nice when I think about it. But I was with the company for around 30 years, and the last the majority of the time I was the CEO and worked for a board of directors. So those are different dynamics, as you could well imagine. You have your stakeholders, and then you also have your directors, if you will, or those that establish large scale policy. So a little bit different audience, but very much the same kind of dynamics when you're dealing with leadership. So did that and moved here to Asheboro back in 2020 during COVID, and decided this is the place I wanted to live, and haven't regretted it at all. Much different than California, obviously, as you can well imagine.
So when you, what brought you here from California?
I used to come to North Carolina every year or so, and I would fly into Charlotte and go to Raleigh, and they had an institute over there that I would go. And the type of business I was in, we would go there, and it was an institute where we would study these different materials and applications. So I would come and I would fly into Charlotte and go to Raleigh, and I'd always go through Asheboro. And I probably about 3 or 4 years before I was thinking about pulling the plug, I said, you know what, I'm going to take a right off Highway 64 and go into Asheboro. And I went in, and it reminded me a lot of my town that I was raised in Colorado. So said when it was done, just said, here's the keys, here's the credit card, see ya, and got the wife and the doggies and came out here and loved it.
Wow. Okay. So what have you been up to since you've been in North Carolina?
Oh my gosh. You know what? And some people might fashion me a leader. You said I was a leader and I'm no longer a leader. Well, you're always kind of a leader because once you get that into your DNA, you become a leader regardless of what you're doing. So I moved out to Asheboro. I saw a need. I felt the need to fill that need, which is kind of what leaders do in many cases. You see a need, you fill it, and then got tired of that because it was too much like what I was doing before in terms, not necessarily the business, but in terms of the leadership pressures and headaches and that kind of thing. So I decided that was it. So I fully retired. Since then, I've been playing golf and drinking a little bourbon and walking the dogs, and it's all good. And gaining weight. For those of you on your podcast that are losing weight, or you losing weight, I found it, brother. I found it. I found it.
Okay.
Thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So you've had a successful career, now enjoying retirement. So this podcast is, it's by leaders for leaders. And let's talk a little bit about leadership. What have been some of the important things that you've learned about leadership during your time?
Well, one of the things is that leadership. There's leadership people and there are leadership positions. The position that I held in leadership still exists. I'm just not filling it. So you have to differentiate between leader people and leader positions. People that are going to be coming around that are CEOs in companies 30, 40, 50 years from now are not even born yet. So you have to realize that position is always there, and it has a requisite set of criteria that you have to fill. And to the degree to which you fill it, you stay there for a long time. To the degree to which you try to change it into your personal style and that type of thing, notwithstanding your own personal convictions and professional efficacy, you can really hoist yourself by your own petard. So that's really the difference between the two, is that I found that when I came into the position that I held, there was no leadership. It was just kind of like a bunch of guys that decided to do this on the spur of a moment, and they wanted to make sure they could play golf and get it written off. So that was my goal, is to make sure that I established a structure whereby they could do that. And then all of a sudden I said, no, there's got to be something more to this than just going around talking about stuff we know about and then writing off golf and eating good dinners. So kind of developed that into a more structured environment where we actually had, staff members. I had 7 staff. And we had a structure. We had a board of directors. Actually brought in someone to help me with board of directors because we got so big so quickly that they didn't understand their role as board of directors as opposed to the heads of companies, which is way different. They were successful in their company, but they tried to run the board the same way, which does not work. Trust me, it does not work. So that was one of the things I found. So I guess the idea is we've got leadership positions that exist right now, and people can learn to fill those needs. They have to find out what those needs are. There's always those standard needs of, and I hate to say it, they might be slipping a little bit, but that personal integrity, that doing what you say you're going to do, your word is your bond, never lie, give the credit, take the blame. Those kinds of things that you always kind of run into when you're the head of an organization. Those things are requisites no matter where you go. And once you get there, you understand that once you establish the structure, which is what I had to do, and which many people either do themselves or have to step into and do, which is very difficult. It's very different from leading. Establishing a structure around leadership is very different than leading. So once you establish that structure around the leadership, then you have to make sure that everybody buys into it and sells out to it, and understand that it's not about personalities any longer. It's not about how good you are necessarily in your particular job. It has to do with how you fill the need within the organizational structure that you've established. That's the key. Is the people that work for me, I could never do their jobs. And they were, in their case, some of the best in their particular industry that they possibly could be in what they did. And if I ended up having to do their job, there was going to be a big fall off. So the key was, my goal was to empower them, to liberate them, to resource them. And then once you do that all well, and the results show themselves in performance and in buying into the leadership, you earn the right to criticize them. And I can remember sometimes the first time, I didn't do it often, but when I did it, when a leader criticizes his staff that you've built up to try to be leaders in their respective, cubicle or in their respective responsibilities, and then it's like a leader against a leader. And that's when you've got gradients of leaders. And some people just don't understand that gradient of leader. They think, well, everybody is a CEO. Well, you're the CEO of publications, but you're not the CEO of the company. And so they would always ask me, why did you decide to do that or not do that? I said, I know stuff you don't know, and you know everything you know about what you know. So the idea was, you don't know what I know, so therefore, and I'm not going to share it with you, not that I don't want to, but it's unnecessary in the way you do your job. So those the criticism conversations many times started off personally, but then you had to rely on the structure, the leadership structure that you've established. And once you establish that leadership structure, everybody kind of buys into the fact that that's where we're going, guys. This is not personal. We're still going to go play golf. We're still going to go have fun. We're going to go to a baseball game, going to drink a little bourbon, but it's not personal. It's about the mission and buying into the mission, and how what you didn't make me mad. It diminished the mission. So that's kind of one of the things that I talk to people about, is the difference between personalities and leadership positions. There's a significant difference, and some people try to put their little stamp on it. You can do that by wearing a coat, by wearing a tie, by not wearing a tie, by the way you hold yourself, whether you come to work in jeans and a t-shirt. That kind of thing kind of establishes the style, but the structure will never change.
Oh, that's good. Okay. So Tell us about an experience you've had when you were in a leadership position. Just like a powerful experience that's helped you grow in your leadership or helped you look at leadership differently.
I think probably the one thing that helped me learn the most was the fact that when you're in a leadership position, especially of a pretty large company, and you have people working for you, there was a time at which you expected or that you thought that personal loyalty to the leader was a given. And I think probably the most powerful thing for me was when I found out that it wasn't. That loyalty is not a given. It's earned every day by a leader. And probably one of the greatest experiences I ever had was there was a guy, I mean, he's a rock star. He was an absolute rock star in what he did. He got so good at what he did it easily. And sometimes when you do things easily, you maybe cut a corner, you don't do the full Monty of what you want to do, so you do that. And I remember saying to him, um, I said, okay, and I'll use the name John. I said, John, dude, you've done that 50 times in your career, 50, and done it excellent 49 times. Well, I mean, what was it that you were thinking? What did you think about that? Come on, you're better than that. Let's fix it. Let's move on. End of conversation. That was about all it was to it. I mean, you're better than that. Fix it. Let's move on. He could have said there are 100 things that he could have said. He could have said, sorry, boss, or my bad, or whatever. He said, so if I fix it, what's in it for me? I could actually taste the blood in my mouth. I could actually taste the anger and the adrenaline in my mouth. It was so visceral that I had to stop. And then I told him, again, unfortunately, from the brain to the mouth is not very far, and it doesn't tend to pass through a lot of filters. So I told him that, what he got was he got to keep his job if he did what I told him to do. He was so upset he had to take a mental health day off. And then he had to take 2 mental health days off. And when he came back, we probably didn't talk for maybe a week or 2. And finally, I had to call him in. And I said, what is wrong with you? I mean, and so we had to get through that. But that was probably one of the greatest impactful things. And then other things where people, I guess, they asked for special favors because they knew the leader. That was probably another impactful thing. They felt they had special access to gain my favor. Who cares about my favor, right? The fact is, oh, by the way, when you're a leader and you leave your leadership position, people forget who you are. Just know that. Always. Always. I mean, people would call me on the cell phone. My wife would get very upset because I'd be sitting out there, and I was in 5 time categories. And so people would call me at 5 o'clock in the morning all the way up till 10 o'clock at night. Finally, I just did shut the phone off, and I did. But I mean, people have no trouble with that. When I retired, I haven't gotten a call from any of those people ever since then, and that's just part of it. Just know that. Don't get all bummed about it. I was bummed about it for a while. I thought, man, I did that guy 20 solids, or gave him a little slack, and that kind of thing means absolutely nothing. Again, you'll find out when you're in leadership positions, many times, and it's unfortunate, but many times people use you in a transactional way rather than a relational way. And once you figure that out, then you understand. And when you start putting your personal ego or personal emotional capital into it, you realize there's a good chance you're going to get burned. And unfortunately, you do.
So, tell me a little bit about, throughout your career, some of the things that you've done to help grow in your leadership. How did you, if you saw you needed to increase in a certain area, how'd you grow in your leadership?
Probably learning to listen completely before responding. A lot of times, if you're in a bang bang world, if you're in a hurry up world, a lot of times you think you anticipate hearing the end of the question or the end of the comment before you do. And one of the things I learned about is the fact that let them completely express themselves. when they start repeating themselves and repeating the idea to try to sell it, there's a difference between expressing and selling. Okay, you can express an idea and emphasize it. You do it many more times than that, starting to sell the idea. And I was going to buy it or not buy it based on its merits, not based on their sales technique. So I would sit there and go like, okay, but I probably that, and then learn how to protect my personal boundaries a little bit better. Going and playing golf by myself rather than with the three guys that wanted to go play golf with the CEO because they knew I'd pick up the check, pick up the tab. And, it just was like they could have 4.5 hours in my ear. And my guess is their objective was to influence my decision-making on a subject, whatever the subject may be that they decided was important to share. My goal was to play golf. And that was probably of the foursome, I was the only one that had any interest or desire to do that. So yeah, one of the things I found is just make sure your personal boundaries are good and strong, and don't ever confuse leadership boundaries with the position, with your personal worth or personal self-identity, because we all find out as soon as we retire, as soon as we leave, whatever the case may be, just how important you were. You were important to someone for a reason. And the reason you were important to them was because they needed something, and you represented a way for them to get it. Period. Not much else more than that, quite frankly.
Yeah. So when we think about the different pieces of leadership, obviously to have success and to have a long, time to be able to do it, it comes at a price, right? And so you mentioned earlier, being forgotten and talking about, some of the headaches that leadership causes. And, you stepped away because what the new thing you were doing felt too much like the old thing you retired from. So what are some of the other, I guess, costs of leadership that we don't really think about all the time?
Well, that's a great question. There are many costs. A lot of people focus on the rewards. In many cases, you might be the highest paid. In most cases, you are the highest paid staff person if you're a leader. And if you're not, you have the most responsibility if you're in a volunteer leadership role. So the cost of leadership can be financial, it can be emotional, it can be structural, it can be marital, it can be all kinds of things. It can be professional as well. I mean, you can have to answer questions so honestly that it may cost you your job. And you have to make peace with that. Otherwise, you'll be a good leader, but you may not be a great leader. And there are times when I've had to answer questions of someone that I said, okay, Tom, this is that time. You have to decide whether or not it's important for you enough to you to answer the question honestly or to answer it expediently and favorably. And you've got to make that decision real quick, because generally hesitation means that the answer coming to that person is not going to be good. So the more you hesitate, it tends to be the less likely they're going to get what they want. So you got to think about that really quickly. So, but yeah, there's physical strain. I mean, there's relaxation that you need to do. You need to be able to power through certain things at certain times physically. I mean, we did a convention. It was 3 days. I probably got 4 or 5 hours sleep at those 3 days. And I had to be on top of my game. Well, I just decided when I flew in, I was going to stone up, I was going to gird up, and I was just going to power through it. And I'll grab my coffee. That's what I drink. I don't drink power drinks or any of that kind of stuff. I drink coffee and I drink water. And those two things kept me going for 3 days. And then when the event was over, my staff would know, because I would put on a hat kind of like what you have on, except it would be pulled way down over my eyes.
Yeah.
I'd have sunglasses on, and it was night. And I had my coat on and kind of like wrapped up around like this. That was the do not talk to Tom or touch him mode. So, because you could end up losing a finger doing that, So again, so you just learn the physical, the emotional side of it as well. The highs can't be as high as your personal highs are, and your lows can't be anywhere near your personal lows. Again, we all have stories of personal highs and personal lows, but again, we just have to make sure. I call it the 80-20%, and many people talk about that 80%, 20%, 80% good, 20% bad. I think that your best high in professionally should never be more than 80% of your entire being, if you will. I don't think that you should never get giddy about a professional success. Nor do I believe that if you have a failure, you should get lower than 20% of your just rock bottom. You should always have that buffer. Now, in life, we tend to live, I mean, I don't know about you, I know you pretty well, but not totally. And sometimes we live at that 95 percentile, right? We'll live at that 95 percentile high and low. You do that professionally, you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to cost yourself more than you ever thought the job would be worth. And that's one of the things you have to establish. You know, we're talking about the cost a little bit before. Okay, what does it cost and what is it worth? Two different calculations.
Oh yeah.
It may cost more than what it's worth. And when it does, that's when you have to make that hard decision: is the reward that I'm receiving worth the cost?
Yeah.
And in most cases, over time, I would dare say anybody that has any introspection at all would sit there and say, you know what, it's just really not, and have to make a change. And I did that. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I did that several times in my career where I just said, you know what, this is just more than I'm willing to pay, regardless of how much money I'm making, all the notoriety, it's just not worth that. And so as a result, I pull the plug and move on.
Yeah, I got asked in a newspaper interview a couple weeks ago, like, have you ever wanted to quit? And my response was, I did. I did. I quit. I walked away.
I not only thought about it, I did.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And you have to, I'm sure you came to the calculation is that, you know, jobs is nice, but is it worth what I'm having to pay? And is the cost worth the reward? And in your particular case, you said, no, it's not. And you moved on. Good for you.
Yeah. So look, man, as we wrap up, you know, one thing that we like to focus our attention toward on this podcast is new and young leaders, right? So if you just had a minute to say something to somebody who was wanting to be a leader or a future leader, what's your message to young and future leaders, Tom?
Watch what your boss does and says, and make sure it's congruent. And everybody knows what congruent is about. The other thing is, if you decide to wound your boss, make sure you kill him. I mean, you've heard that before many times. Don't mess with the boss and then you plan on taking him out. And again, we're speaking metaphorically here. Let's make sure we understand we're speaking metaphorically. But what I'm saying is that a lot of people think they're ready before they are. And the kind of discussion we've had tonight, you may not have realized the cost. You see the fact that you get the corner office and somebody might bring you coffee, or you get to fly first class, or you get to go here, go there. They don't realize what it is that you're doing when they don't see you. So as a leader, you need to speak honestly and do what you say you're going to do and carry those things forward and hope that young leader catches on. And if you're a young person looking to lead, the more you learn from that leader that does the right thing. I'm not talking about doing the wrong thing. I'm talking about doing the right thing. Leads with honor, leads with dignity, leads with integrity. If you see them doing that and taking a few blows and taking a few dents along the way and everything like that, that's the kind of person you're going to want to try to emulate. And whether you emulate in his job by staying in the company for a long time or in another job, you will have learned something. And again, the way you learn is you listen and you watch. And when you listen to what they say. And when you watch what they do. And when you do both those things, you can evaluate pretty quickly over time, in a short time, whether or not the leader that you're following is worthwhile following. And that's really the key, is follow a leader that's worthy of following. Don't follow somebody that will take you down a path of destruction or take you down a path that you may end up being in the case where all of a sudden, holy cow, I got this. I got his job. Let's say, for example, I got his job, and it's the worst thing that ever happened to me. You never want that to have happen. So
Yeah.
I think that's good advice. Probably somebody would have told me that, 40 years ago, 45 years ago. I probably would have still had hair and had a much different life. But I like the life I have now. I have my small little life here in North Carolina, and I am loving it every day.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thanks, Tom. So, hey, anything else before we go?
No, good luck to everybody. I know that this is a challenging time to be a leader.
Yeah.
I mean, there are faux leaders, there are structural leaders, there are people that want to be leaders, there are people that are forced into being leaders, that kind of thing. Just make sure that you fit in and take control of your own destiny by making sure that the leadership position, and make sure that's what you want to do. First of all, not everybody wants to be a leader. Maybe everybody wants to be a leader, and then you get a taste of it. You don't like it. That's okay. That's cool. Just make sure that if you aspire to that leadership position, that you'll end up doing it for the right reasons and for the right rewards, which cause you to come home, have a nice meal, maybe take a vacation, maybe go out on a walk with your dogs or something like that. I'm going to do after I get through with this, and we'll just talk about that. But again, make sure that the leadership that you're following is one that carries over, and again, maintain that perspective of 80-20. Have a great victory at work, come home and still be abundantly glad that you're home. Don't be so glad that you feel like, oh man, I feel bad that I'm home. I want to go back to work and let me finish off those 13 hours or 14 hours. Forget it. You're not productive, and you'll probably do more harm than good.
Okay. That's awesome. Thanks so much for the conversation, Tom.
You're welcome.
Hey, to you, the listeners, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being with us and for sticking out to the end of the episode. Look, we will continue doing these every 2 weeks, and make sure you're following the social medias. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe this episode and the podcast page. Thanks, and we will see you again soon.